Carry on.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Poverty Reduction Development Committee. First of all, apologies for absence.
Yeah, well, apologies from David Halliwell and Erica Kirchner.
Before we go to item 2, can I just welcome Lyndon to this committee. I was also going to welcome David, but he's not here. Item 2, disclosures of personal and prejudicial. Anybody? No, so straight on to approve the minutes. The last meeting is a correct record. Pages 1, page 2, page 3, minutes as a whole. Somebody move.
Sorry, Chair, can I just say a quick thing? Chair?
Yeah.
Just on page 2, where it says Councillor Elvie Walton thanked Councillor Mary Sherwood for her work on the draft policy. I think I was also trying to say thank you for all the work she'd done. I know we were talking about that particular item, but I wanted to pass my thanks back for all the hard work that she'd put in over the time she's been chair.
We'll have that a little bit afterwards, because I remember you saying that.
Thank you.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody got anything to say on the minutes? No? That takes us straight on to item 4. Swansea Council tackling poverty strategy is a revision. This revision was due to be looked at last year, but due to the pandemic, obviously there were certain things pushed to one side and members were transferred to more important work. So that the cabinet member asked if we could look at this as a matter of urgency to do our next strategy from 21 to 24, I should imagine. So I'll ask Anthony to come in and introduce this. Anthony, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I think everyone knows me, Anthony Richards from the Tackling Poverty Service. So I'm going to I'll give a quick overview of the report. I'm sure you've all seen it though. So as the Chair said, yes, the current Swansea Council Tackling Poverty strategy was from 2017 to 2020. At this moment in time, we're still considering it current. I can see Leslie, you got your hand up.
So I'm just getting in early. I'll come in later. It's all right. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm just saying that the current strategy, even though I'm calling it current, it ran out in 2020. So this report, essentially, the recommendation that we're putting forward is that PDC approve what is essentially section 2 of the report as the starting point for the co-production process for the revision of the strategy with our partners and our communities. Really important that our partners and communities have a voice in the revision of this strategy. And for point of clarification, it's a Swansea Council Tackling Poverty strategy rather than a Swansea-wide tackling poverty strategy. As we know, tackling poverty is one of Swansea Council's 6 corporate priorities, 21-22. And as the Chair already said, the current strategy was due for review in the last financial year, but due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the resources that would have been involved in that process were reallocated to urgent response work there. So I'm going to skip to section 2, really, which sets out four key statements, if you like, as the starting point for taking out to co-produce with our partners and our communities. The first 3 are existing in the current strategy, and they are, number 1, which is in 2.1, that the current strategy establishes an approach in which tackling poverty is everyone's business across the council. It's a corporate priority, and the tackling poverty strategy reflects that and recognises that the responsibility for tackling poverty sits within all departments. There's activity that all departments can contribute towards the tackling poverty agenda. The second point is 2.2, and I don't want to risk reading out the report here. So that sets out the definition for poverty that was established in the previous strategy, with 3 points: income below the minimum income standard, inadequate access to necessary services of good quality, and inadequate opportunity of resource to join in with social, cultural, leisure and decision-making activities. Again, that is from the existing strategy. And the same applies to the third point, which is 2.3, which establishes the vision for Swansea. So this sets out the Swansea in which Swansea Council would like to see. So I'm not going to read that out there. It's in the report. It's in the current strategy. 2.4 though establishes a set of draft priorities. Now these draft priorities were not in the current strategy. These are newly developed, and in part, or a large contribution to the thinking behind this, is what we've learned from our response to the coronavirus pandemic, and what we've learned to date in terms of how we work as an organisation and how we work with our partners, and what's important in terms of tackling poverty and will make a difference. So the idea being that if we establish a set of priorities that sits underneath the vision for Swansea, the priorities lead to the kind of, well, how is it we're going to work towards achieving that vision? So I will go through these draft priorities as they're new. Number 1, enabling strong families and communities. Number 2 is around education attainment, so improving educational attainment, routes to further education, training or employment, and opportunities for learning throughout life. So that's throughout the life course learning, not just within school setting, but throughout life. 3, improving access to affordable and secure homes. 4, improving opportunities for participation for all, including social, cultural, leisure activities and co-produced solutions. Co-production being very important part of this work, and reflective in the development of the Swansea Poverty Truth Commission work that we're undertaking. Number 5, maximising income and reducing costs. Number 6, promoting economic growth that is accessible, inclusive and benefits everyone. And the thinking around that kind of word accessible, that's also to include, that's where kind of transportation and thinking about how people perhaps access jobs, that's where that would sit. Number 7, supporting people to improve their employability, find work that pays fairly and progress within work. Number 8, reducing health inequalities and improving well-being. And number 9, supporting people in crisis or risk of crisis, or the most vulnerable. And that's been very much a large part of the work that we've done over this last year, particularly around the food agenda. And a lot of new work has come out of that. So just to recap that, so the first 3 sections, 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, exist within the current strategy. 2.4, those draft priorities would be how we create the framework that would deliver towards achieving the vision that we want for Swansea. And the recommendation is that we take those 4 sections as our starting point for having the conversation, the co-production with our partners and our communities about the revision of the strategy, asking questions like, is the vision still correct? Are these priorities, are they going to work? Are there any gaps? this would allow the framework for those conversations to take place and to start that co-production process. So really important, and really pleased to be able to bring this to PDC to kick off this revision of the strategy process. I'll take any questions at this point, and I can see that Leslie put her hand up, I think, first, so I'm going to go to Leslie first.
Yeah, such enthusiasm. Right. But being serious though, I think looking at the draft that was for, or the strategy programme for 17-20, I think most of that is probably still relevant with the new aspects, particularly how to react to COVID and so on and so forth. One of my big things is always a case of, yes, you need to put everything into context, give it a setting, say what poverty is, etc., etc., etc. But I sometimes think that tends to hide what for me is far more important, and that is, what are we going to do about it? So I would hope that this document, when it gets reviewed, because it's good as it is, but makes it a lot plainer and clearer, if you like, almost in two sections. Section A, what have we got now, etc., etc., and then section B, what are we going to do about it? Because from my point of view, I'm sure most will agree, we get so much paperwork to read. So the more we can cope with what we're reading, the more we can read the bits that show us what we can be doing to help support, all for the better. So, but I mean, you're going in the right direction, definitely. Just give us as much help as possible so we can also help you. Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. Point taken. I think an important part of the revision of the document, and I very much see it as being a new document rather than an amended version of the existing document. And for me, something I'd like to achieve out of this is a document that's easier to read, perhaps more concise and relevant, and something and would include that kind of, not just what we're going to do about it, but how we're going to work, the way in which we work, not just within the council, and this is a council strategy, but how we work with our partners as well. Okay, thanks, Leslie. I'm not sure who put their hands up next. I'll think I'll probably just go in alphabetical order. Is that fair?
Christine was next.
Oh, Christine. Thanks, Chair. Christine?
Yeah. Thank you, Anthony, but I think it is up to the chair to call people in, actually. Okay. Okay, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was delighted to hear what Leslie just said about the report should also talk about what we're going to do about it, rather than just warm words about fighting poverty. I like the 9 points that are in in paragraph 2. And I think we've got a lot to learn from what's happened over the last 18 months with regard to COVID and lockdown, and the way that communities have been working together. I think Swansea showed that when terrible things do happen, people can pull together. So I think there are definitely lessons to be learned and things to be built on from that. As we all know, I mean, Wales isn't doing particularly well with regard to average earnings, and certainly people in the lower income brackets have been adversely affected by COVID and job losses and all the rest of it. So in my mind, there are, all of these things that we have listed here. The economic progress is kind of one thing, but on the other hand, we've got to support our communities and our people in Swansea to get the best lives possible with what we've got. That, I think, is what I believe in very, very simple terms. I think as well that we need to look at what's going on elsewhere. I know certainly the Equality and Social Justice Committee of the Welsh Government met in July, although that was in, that was not in the public domain. But if the Welsh Government is going to be doing work in this area as well, we should clearly not ignore what's going on there. But no, I absolutely welcome Leslie's comment about what are we going to do about it, not just describe what it is and wring our hands, but let's come up with a plan for, doing the best we can.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Peter?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would endorse, first of all, the comments of both Leslie and Christine in relation to going forward and so forth. Can I comment, just going back to the existing strategy, the 17 to 20 strategy, I was a little surprised that in presenting it, there was no update in terms of, well, what actually did it achieve? What has been the result of that strategy? Very interesting read. I found it very informative, very instructive, very helpful, but it doesn't actually give any indication of what the consequences of Swansea Council applying this strategy over the past 3-4 years has actually been. So I thought that was slightly odd. In other words, what are the outcomes of this strategy being applied? There must have been some. I hope there were. And then just quickly, first of all, in relation to that document, too, in section 4, why intervene, there's a set of figures relating to the UK's standing in relation to other OECD countries in terms of 4 categories, and obviously pretty poor outcome in all 4 of them. But I thought a 5th one could be considered in relation to the next strategy, and that is educational attainment levels. And it's clearly that is an important factor too in relation to people coming from deprived backgrounds and so on. So I'd like to suggest that be added along with any others to any assessment in the next strategy document. And then moving on to the brief report that we've had. First of all, in paragraph 1.3, we're reminded that the purpose of the strategy is to, quote, reduce poverty. Obviously, that's a good objective, and it'd be great if we can do that, although I suspect that that lies more in the hands of national government than in local government, but obviously it's an objective we can make a small contribution to. But I think also what we're doing is living with poverty as much as reducing poverty. In other words, how do we help people who are in poverty to make the best of it? It's not an acceptance of poverty. We'd all like to see an end to poverty, but the fact of the matter is it's there, it's going to continue, and it's how people can best live with poverty as well. So there's a point there. And then moving on down the document to the definition of poverty, which I believe is a Joseph Rowntree Foundation definition, the 3 bullet points. But clearly the first of those remains fundamental. Low income, I suspect, largely drives the other 2 in terms of access to services and opportunity to join in various kinds of activity. In other words, you couldn't have the second and the third, I suspect, as a definition of poverty without the first of them. So I think we mustn't lose sight of the fact that at the end of the day, whilst all are relevant, it's actually income that is fundamental. And then finally, in terms of moving down the sections of 2 to 2.4, the list of 9 points to be suggested for inclusion in the next strategy document. Number 2 is only a small point, but not an unimportant point. Further and higher education. The 2 are not the same, Chair. And I think it's important that we're not suggesting, by not mentioning higher education, that people with poor backgrounds are somehow totally excluded from higher education. They are not. And I think we must make sure that's included in it. And then under number 8, sorry, in that list, reduce health inequalities and improve well-being, I would add, including access to green space and opportunities and knowledge for growing food. I mean, we as a committee, of course, are looking at these as part of the overall work plan and part of the overall process of addressing poverty, how to live with poverty, and having access to green space, growing your own food, are important ways in which we can contribute to making poverty more tolerable for people who unfortunately are in those circumstances. So just those small points that I'd like to suggest be included. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Anthony, do you want to respond to that?
Great, thanks for your input. Yeah, absolutely. In terms of on the draft priorities there, yeah, further and higher education, I think that's a really good point. It wasn't excluding that, but it makes it clear. And absolutely, in terms of point 3, that's where access to green space and supporting the growing of food would sit. So yeah, can make those amends before we even go out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Linda?
Great, thanks, Chair. A couple of things. I think education is a huge part to play in eradicating poverty. And I know, because I chair the scrutiny group for education, and we are looking around always about free school meals to make sure that children on free school meals get the very best, and they're not left behind. And that was, obviously something during the pandemic about accessibility to, computers and so on, and Chromebooks. So that is quite key. I sit on the Education Policy Development Committee, and one of the things that we came up with was a skills partnership, because when many teachers and heads started off in education, it wasn't part of their role years ago to be looking at business and everything else, and therefore the skills partnership helped to achieve that, because it's really important that we don't second guess what business want, so that we've got the right skills in Swansea. And we are lucky with the city deal coming on track that children in Swansea can have those good jobs, earn the good money, so they don't have to leave Swansea. So we have a real opportunity. And I found that using my community fund, I've helped in sport and music, and because those are areas that not everybody is academic. And it really is important we tackle those areas to bring people together. And I've helped create a jazz group, which involves people from all walks of life, young people from about 15 to 18. But, sport and music, that really is important, so that we can inspire children. And one particular person who I managed to get invited to, he was very keen on darts, and there was a competition going on with national players, and I got him invited, and that has now become, he met them, he worked with them, and he's now become his career. So it doesn't need to be academic. Here's a guy earning eye-watering money for a person in his high 20s. Really, you started off by going to a darts match that I sent him on. So really important. So as I say, we are working very hard on the education PDC. The skills partnership isn't quite there, because I was speaking to Robert Smith about it. There are a few things we need to do, but my goodness, they've done a lot of things about accessibility and how people can go online and see what careers are there. Really is an example to many councils. So that is really good. The other thing I mentioned on the point 243, and that was about housing. I linked up with a group, and they've now been established as the Gower Land Trust, and that involves actually people who come together. They can't afford a house, and very often in a lot of affluent communities where they were brought up, they can no longer live there because they can't afford to, and that shouldn't be right. And very often it's because people buy second homes, and therefore I remember speaking to Robert Francis Davis about the thing about doubling the council tax for people with second homes, because they don't add anything very often to the local community. They might buy a few things in the shop, but in the main they bring everything in with them. And what you do find is that people who've been living there all their lives, and it could be the sons of the people who are there now, can't afford to buy anything. So this Gower Land Trust, it's got the support of Tonia Antoniazzi and Rebecca Evans, and I'm sponsoring a meeting for them tomorrow night in the community to see they actually get about building houses, taking people through the process of what they want. So they're not going to be huge sites. Maybe 12 houses or something, so they can fit into any community quite easily, but it does create affordable houses for local people. And looking forward to tomorrow night. As I say, I'm hosting the meeting tomorrow night, so it should be really, really interesting. So there is obviously work going on, but I think it's about what we can do to help, really, rather than, and there are a lot of things out there that will help us to do that. Because rather than just talk about it, I think as we were talking about, in the sense that let's get on and do something.
Yeah, thank you for that, Lyndon. A couple of good points there. Right, Lynn.
Right, thank you, Chair. Just two brief points. I always feel a little bit nervous when I hear about local authorities that don't have a poverty department and say that it's everybody's priority, or it's a corporate priority, therefore everybody should be dealing with it. Because I think if you look through some examples in local authorities around South Wales which have adopted that approach, you often see that there are clashes between corporate priorities. Say, just to take as an example, education. An education department may well have a set of corporate objectives. It's also supposed to be dealing with poverty, and at some points there will be a dilemma for the education department. Do they follow their core education objectives, or do they take part in some sort of anti-poverty objective, which is not part of their core remit, but which is nonetheless a corporate objective which they are expected to be part of. And I worry that in that type of situation, there are numerous examples around South Wales of where the senior officers and the cabinet member in those departments have said, would love to help you on your poverty objective, but our corporate priority for this year is to deal with these education objectives, and therefore we can't quite stretch our resources to deal with the corporate poverty objective. And I just feel nervous about situations where you don't have a named individual that's responsible for poverty work in that sense. And similar to that, I didn't see in the report, but I'm happy to be corrected if it is the case. I would prefer, if we were going to have that type of approach of saying we haven't got a poverty department or a cabinet responsibility for it, to have a named individual within each department who is then responsible for making sure that that particular department follows any anti-poverty objectives which are relevant to that department's work. I fear that if you haven't got a named individual that's responsible, things can be slipped through the net with the best will in the world. And I just like some comments on those, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Les, you want to come back?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It was just going a bit further on the point that Peter Jones raised about higher and further education. I also think that maybe we ought to explain what those are, what the difference is, because that's quite important. But then linking into what Lyndon said, I think we've also got to recognise that both are equally important. Just because somebody is academically clever doesn't make them any better or worse than somebody who is practically clever. And we should always treat those two the same, which is, I mean, going back to Peter's point, he's absolutely right. We should mention both routes, but we should also acknowledge both routes go hand in hand. Some people will go down that route, some people will go down that route, and we should treat them equally. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Les. There's nobody else wants to speak. Yeah, I think what's proved at this point is how wide poverty is. It affects nearly every department of the council. And I can understand Ryland by saying, well, we should have a poverty officer in every department to cover everything. Whether that's practical or not, maybe it's something either we as a policy committee can look in, but it's up to the finances and how that's gonna pan out. Yeah, agree with Peter on the education. Yeah, I think, Anthony, before we go to the recommendation, if you want to come back and make some comments as what we said.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll just pick up on a couple of the latter points there, particularly around what the points that Ryland was making there. So, I mean, in Swansea, we do have a tackling poverty service. It comprises of myself and a team that work on the kind of strategy development and very much supporting partnership working internally and externally. The tackling poverty service also comprises local area coordination, lifelong learning, welfare rights, and the employability team. And as far as named representatives from other departments, we tend to use, we have a number of forums that we utilise, and we have an internal Swansea Council poverty forum chaired by the Deputy Chief Executive. It meets on a monthly basis, and we're currently looking at some priorities there, but that's very much around bringing departments together, and there are representatives from across departments within the council that regularly attend that. We look at current issues, we look at ways that we can work together on particular issues. Sometimes it is different representatives from different departments, but again, that sometimes also reflects the nature of the piece of work. It might not be sitting with one individual within the department, it might be someone else's specialty. So there's kind of pros and cons to having a named individual, I think. But the idea is certainly something that we should explore further. And I would suggest the Internal Poverty Forum would probably be a place where the recommendation perhaps from PDC to look at that should go to.
Right, Peter, you've got a hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Could I go back to the point I made at the beginning of my remarks about the original strategy, the 2017 to 2020 strategy, and what it had achieved? I just wondered whether Anthony, please, could just comment on what do you think has been the successes of that strategy, maybe the shortcomings, maybe the failures. Do you feel that it has contributed, and in what way, to reducing / alleviating poverty in Swansea?
I think, thank you for the question and the opportunity to comment on that. I think I could probably talk for some time and go into lots of detail around so much work that's happened during the lifespan of that strategy. And I think for me, the main point, one of the main outcomes of the Swansea Council Tackling Poverty Strategy is that it has raised the tackling poverty agenda across all departments within the council, and it has actually facilitated new working relationships between internal departments on joint pieces of work that are either directly aimed to tackle poverty, or perhaps in some instances look at the ways in which we are doing pieces of work or undertaking activities that we do anyway, but how we consider tackling poverty as part of that work. I don't know, hopefully that makes sense. In terms of some of the I suppose some of the key outcomes is that one of the key recommendations or pieces of work arising from that strategy is the development of a Swansea Poverty Truth Commission, which is about including the voice of people with lived experience of poverty in decision making around poverty. And I'm pleased to say that that piece of work is underway. We are currently recruiting community commissioners with lived experience of poverty, and within this year we are aiming to launch the Swansea Poverty Truth Commission. So without the strategy and without the previous work actually that led into the development of the strategy that has just coming to an end, that important piece of work wouldn't be happening right now, or perhaps it wouldn't have been raised through the development of the strategy.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Adam. David?
Anthony, the comment you just made about raising the profile of anti-poverty work in the council, I'm a bit intrigued by that statement that it's happening now, given that it has been the council's policy since 2012 that poverty is one of the major planks of policy delivery within this authority, and that the Commission has been spoken about since 2013. Why are they only happening now?
Thank you, David. I would say that through the delivery of the strategy, or through the work of the strategy, which has engaged departments across the council, and the strategy that we've just had is the second iteration of the Swansea Council Poverty Strategy. That has provided the framework, if you like, then for cross-departmental working and accountability in terms of tackling poverty. It's provided the platform for the continuation and the development of the internal poverty forum, which has focused on particular areas, focused on bringing particular issues to the fore that have been discussed in a cross-departmental cross-departmental room, if you like, then so that solutions can be found and different links can be made. So that there has been a lot of internal partnership work in that wouldn't have happened without the strategy as a first port of call being the framework for that to happen within, and the poverty forum as being the space for that to happen and develop as the landscape changes, which has happened particularly in the last year with the coronavirus pandemic and our response to that. And your second point around the Swansea Poverty Truth Commission, the startup process for working towards establishing the commission started in, I think it was 2019. There were plans being made to start that, but the whole startup process is part of the commission itself. You can't just jump straight to launching the commission. It requires the resources to be found and put in place, including funding, recruiting a host organisation for the commission, recruiting and putting in place a facilitation team. So that work has been happening over quite a period now. And at the start of that period, we engaged all of Swansea, including third sector organisations and front-facing organisations in terms of, is this something that we want and would be supported in Swansea? We engaged at the start with people with direct lived experience of poverty to establish if this is something that they thought would be of value for Swansea, and with kind of core business leaders and civic and business leaders in Swansea for the same question before that startup process took place. And that's been ongoing for a while now. And the COVID pandemic has had an impact on that. It was the beginning of April last year when the facilitation team was actually recruited and put into place. But the pandemic has had an impact on that work. It didn't put it on hold, but it did mean that it was taking a little bit longer because we were having to engage with people via digital means rather than actually getting out and meeting with potential community commissioners in the way that has happened in other areas.
Thank you. David, is that an old hand or is it another one? You're on mute, David. You still on mute, David?
Sorry, Anthony, I hear what you say, but to pick up from Peter's point earlier, as we've been doing this for over 9 years, don't you think we should have a more concrete outcome than it's raised the profile of anti-poverty in Swansea? What physical benefit have we delivered in 9.5 years to those living in poverty and disadvantage in the city?
Well, quite a lot. I mean,
Can you tell us what it is then?
the welfare rights team raise incomes and entitlements worth millions of pounds.
Sorry, Anthony, the welfare rights team has been around for a very long time. What concrete benefits have we achieved in the past 9.5 years? There's been an awful lot of talking. What physically have we done to improve the lives of the people living in poverty and with disadvantage in the city? You know, something concrete.
Amy,
Not what's happened to the council, what's happened to the people outside?
Amy, you've got your hand up there. Do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, thank you. Apologies for being really quite late into this meeting. So sorry, I missed some of the initial comments, but I think some of them have been reiterated as well. So just to address Councillor Phillips's question there around the outcomes and the achievements of the work. I think the current iteration of the Tackling Poverty strategy, the 2017 to 2020, is quite different from the earlier version. So I'm afraid this before my time. I know that's easy to sort of give that as a response, but I don't actually know the whole background in terms of that 4 years. But I know the scrutiny panel looked at it, and that's why the version from 17 to 20 was in the way it was. We can't, I can give you some stats information now in terms of the outcomes, but we can certainly bring something back if you'd like as PDC in terms of those key headline figures. But I think if we just looked at it around some of our original aspirations with the 17-20 policy or strategy rather, it was around young people and adults having good jobs. And in this time, we've had the CAMNESA programme, the Workways, the Communities for Work Plus, and a number of Swansea Working's been launched in that time. Hundreds and hundreds of people have gone into work. We've done skills development programmes in this time, particularly targeted at those in areas of disadvantage and also tackling poverty. We had the closure of the Old Communities First programme, the Legacy programme, so continued on with financial inclusion work, engagement work, community support. Local area coordination has gone from having 4 members of staff, I think it was in 2016, or maybe it was 5, through a full team now. Just last week we did the last recruitment and we've got the full team. We've also done the investment around bricks and mortar, the city deal, so some of those large infrastructure projects which have brought in jobs and employment. The whole early help hub support, the early help focus around child and family was one of the initiatives that was identified within the strategy initially, and that's come to fruition now in terms of the work. We did the assessments around the policy and practice work. So those of you who've been around a few years, we did that a couple of years ago. And that really showed us how if we focused a bit more attention around some of the benefits and entitlements people were having, it could increase the income that was coming into people's pockets. And so whilst we've had a welfare rights team for a number of years, I think the real focus and the data and the information we've had has enabled that targeted work. And around skills I've mentioned already, we've also got increased activity around the domestic violence approaches and domestic abuse hub. This is some focused work that we've had. Also, our colleagues across culture, leisure, community centres, libraries, all those initiatives tie in with the aspirations of the strategy. So that's where it becomes a cross-authority approach. But if you want some of these headline stats, we can certainly bring them in terms of that. The current strategy, again, I'd have to dig out a report that was done at the end of that scrutiny report in 2017. Maybe it was early 18 as well, to get the rest of the information.
Thank you. Christine, last speaker on this now, we've had quite a long debate.
Thank you, Chair. While we've been discussing this as well, I've been looking at StaffNet, and I've found, I mean, there are papers on StaffNet to do with poverty reduction, and there is the Tackling Poverty strategy. There's a delivery plan for 2018 to 2020 where there's a whole list of things, whether the themes are broken down into objectives and key performance indicators. And I've heard what Amy's just said, and it strikes me that there is a lot of stuff going on it's just pulling it all together to say, look, this is what we're doing about poverty in Swansea, because when she was listing all the things that have been going on, and yeah, I'm aware of a lot of those, not all of them, but maybe it's just about bringing all this stuff together. If we're looking at a whole council approach to poverty, then we need to be bringing together everything the council is doing on the poverty strategy. David was right, I think, to highlight it, and I think there may well be good outcomes and data that people have got within the local authority, but I think it's right that we should ask to share that information as well. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Yeah, I think the strategy is out there, and we're following the strategy, but I think when it comes to measuring it, because it goes across the whole of the authority, then the different performance indicators go to different scrutiny committees. But what doesn't happen is said that it's related to a poverty strategy. So it just goes to one scrutiny, they look at the indicators and say, oh, that looks okay. Although I know Peter asked quite a lot of questions on the indicators in the scrutiny that I'm involved in. But I think what it doesn't do then is relate back to the strategy, and that's what's missing. And I think we've got a recommendation 3.1. And I think what Anthony would take on board now is the two things, you know, what are we going to do? If there's anything on that, and then how do we measure it? I wouldn't say that performance indicators would come to this committee, because it goes to it goes to a scrutiny committee, and we're not a scrutiny committee. So if you take those on board, Anthony, and first of all, can we move the recommendation, which says that the poverty reduction.
Sorry, can I just ask a question before you take the vote? This is a policy development committee, so we're to develop the policy of the council. What's the point of us making recommendations to cabinet for a policy if the people who have implemented it have different measures of achievement?
I didn't get that. See? I didn't get that, David. It was. I don't know.
You're right that this is not a scrutiny committee, Chairman, but this is the policy development committee where we make recommendations to cabinet about development of council policy. The council has got an anti-poverty policy. If we are amending that as we're going along and keep making sure it's keeping to track, there is an element of scrutiny in that, but we're making those recommendations. But what's the point of having an anti-poverty strategy if the departments, sections of the council responsible for implementing that policy measure what they're doing by different measures of achievement? There should be some cohesion between how we're going to measure whether the work delivered on tasks by different sections of the council actually pull into the corporate whole. We should be able to have a measurement, not just, oh, it's difficult to say what we've done because they do it this way and they do it that way. Which way is the council doing it?
Yeah. Maybe also with the scrutiny, when they get the performance indicators, so does the cabinet member, and so does the cabinet. So they should be looking at that, and whether the cabinet member will say, well, to us, well, I don't think our policy is working, or I think it is working, this is what we've done, then that could come back to us to say that what we've done was correct. But, you know, it's not just scrutiny as well, it's more than just the scrutiny. It was my fault just by mentioning scrutiny, but the cabinet member as well will keep an eye on policies that relate to the cabinet member. So can I go back to the recommendation? Is that the PDC approve the Swansea Council tackling poverty strategy revision as set out in section 2 of this report as a starting point, co-produce a final version with our partners and communities. Can we move that first? Yeah, Les has moved it. Ryland seconded. We all agreed. And just to follow up to that, can I ask Anthony, is there any timeline when this will come back to us? Not just leave it out there now and forget about it.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, important point to raise in terms of timescale. So if we consider co-production with our partners, communities, consultation process also to collect comments and then revise a strategy. I think if we said bringing back a draft revision to the PDC, then January would be a reasonable timescale.
Yeah, that's plenty of time. Are we okay with it coming back January the 20, whatever the meeting's on? Okay, thank you for that. Moving on to the item 5, the corporate personal debt recovery policy. Some mouthful, isn't it? That's you again, Anthony.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so this is following on from previous discussions about moving forward with the development of a corporate debt policy, or as the report is titling it, a corporate personal debt recovery policy. In section 1, it's setting out what it is. You know, what is a corporate personal debt recovery policy? So the policy would aim to set out how Swansea Council would work with its partners and customers to collect personal debt, and what it would do to help those who are experiencing debt or at risk of debt. Debt is being defined as any amount owed that has not been paid by the due date. And within the report then, there are some examples of services within the authority that do collect personal debt from people, so including housing rents, council tax, parking penalty charges, social care fees, housing benefit overpayments, housing recharges, birthing charges, fines for littering, and that list is not exhaustive, but just some examples there around debts that individuals could owe the local authority. Section 2 of the report aims to set out why we would want to have such a policy. So we recognise that a significant proportion of services or council services rely on income from taxes and service charges, so that we are able to deliver those services. And if those charges are not collected effectively, then we would be unable to properly fund services, or alternatively, the cost would have to be would fall to others to have to pay. The Chief Finance Officer of the local authority is required under the Local Government Act 1972 to ensure proper financial affairs of the council, including income due to the council. Including income due to the council. But we also know that anyone can experience financial difficulty, and that communities thrive when people can afford healthy lives. We therefore recognise that early engagement from those at risk of debt, or those who are experiencing debt, can help prevent debts from escalating, and it increases the ability of citizens to be able to meet their financial responsibilities. So the development of this policy would reflect this, and it would reflect that balance between the authority needing to collect debts, but how we can act and how we can work as an organisation to support those who are experiencing or at risk of being in debt. So the recommendation of this report is that PDC convene a working group together with relevant service representatives who are involved in the collection of debts from individuals, be invited to a workshop to further look at developing the policy and how the principles of a corporate personal debt policy could be implemented across services. It's really important that we have input from those departments and those people with expertise around how our aspirations for this policy could actually be put into practice. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Yes.
Thanks, Chair. Totally agree that the policy has got to look at the balance between the council having to be financially, I can't think of what the term is, but it's beholden on us to make sure we maximise income coming in, but at the same time being very aware that there are many people out there who have got little or no resources, and we've got to understand that and also get across the barrier of how to make sure they know we're contacting them, what we're contacting them about, and the fact that first and foremost we can help support them. We are not just saying you've got a bill to pay, you haven't had it, cough up. So it's looking at all those things sensitively, and I certainly would be very interested in joining a small working group. Last year or the year before, it probably is now, we were looking at particularly at rent letters, and especially the very first one. And I think we got to a point where we made that much more user-friendly, non-threatening, a helpful approach, and hopefully more easy to read. Although, of course, I realise one of the biggest problems is when somebody has a letter on their doorstep, how on earth do you guarantee that they read it at all, let alone that when they open it up, it comes across as helpful, and it uses language they can understand, all these sort of issues. So I would definitely be very interested in joining a group on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Les. Yeah. Peter?
Yes, thank you, Chair. When reading this report, and like Les, I'd be interested in joining a small working group if that's what we decide to do. But what is happening at present? In other words, does the council at present have what we might call a corporate personal debt recovery policy, or is this a matter that's left to individual service sectors facing debts in relation to their own particular areas of responsibility to respond to? So there's no overall corporate position. Each section deals with problems in its own way, and these may differ from extreme harshness all the way through to generosity, if we can use those two expressions. So this is my ignorance of the situation. Just what is happening at present, please?
Don't want to that now, Anthony, or do you want Linda to come in? Kiss. Yeah, come on, Linda, you come in with your question first.
Okay, good. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, no, I can remember Leslie mentioned the terminology of the letters, and I can remember us looking at those letters, and some of them were quite harsh. And by changing the words, it made them a bit more user-friendly. I think sometimes when people are in this position, they very often bury their heads in the sand, and we need to look at a way of getting them to engage, because I think Anthony mentioned early engagement was vitally important, and I think that is quite key to this. But ultimately as well, not everybody is going to be able to find a job or work, but people need to be given a hand into getting employment and get them or people in work, see how they could develop their careers to be able to increase their income potential. And that is the way of getting people out of poverty.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. Before Anthony comes in, I think the 2.3 where you mentioned about early engagement, I think is vital, because you also hit the nail on the head. A couple of words down to stop the debts from escalating, and I think that's the most important thing, and that's when people really worry about their own safety. Then, for want of a better thing, once those debts start rising and rising. I think Peter is right. What do we do at the moment? How can we improve it? Well, that's where the policy comes in. Because at the end of the day, we're still here to collect debts. I think that's one of the main important things about it. But I think where we come into it is how do we collect these debts? Right, Anthony?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the input. There, some really good points made, and I think, yeah, that if I pick up firstly the comment that Peter made about kind of what's happening currently, and yes, there isn't a corporate policy that sets out how we as an organisation treat or aim to help people who owe us money for whatever reason. different departments will have different processes that they perhaps have to go through, whether that's for legal reasons or Welsh Government framework or some other kind of influence that sets that. But what we don't have is a kind of overall approach to what is our offer, how do we aim to help people to access that free and impartial advice if they want it, and that's part of that approach. So currently, no, there is no policy that does that. The idea of this policy is that it would set a corporate approach for how we as an organisation aim to support people who owe us money for whatever reason, and how we would aim to offer support and help where it's needed, whether people, particularly, if people want it and they're able to engage with us early around their money worries, or if they're already in debt, then how we would provide that help and how we would actually go through and provide that help, whether it is through ourselves or through our partners that we work with.
Thank you for that. Nobody else? So the recommendation is we set up a working group. And what I suggest is we did agree to have a meeting in August. So if we change the August meeting to a working group. So I don't know if you want to indicate whether you're going to come to the working group, make sure we got enough numbers. So Les has said that she will be there, Peter, myself, Ryland, myself, well, I think we're on the way there, and Lyndon. So we set up the working group for the 23rd of August. The other thing is the meeting is at 3:30. Are you happy with 3:30? Or would you like to start half an hour earlier? Because we don't know how long this one's going to take. There could be a number of officers come in, although we don't know whether they're on holidays or not. If you're happy to start up at 3, I'm happy. I'm fine with that. Peter?
Yeah, I would rather we started a little earlier, if that's possible. 3:30. Nothing wrong in principle with 3:30, of course, or any other time, but I think I would find it more useful if we started, say, at 2:30 or 3. I don't know.
Anybody struggling with 2:30? No. So we'll have the working group 2:30 on the 23rd of August.
Thank you.
Okay,
Yes, must be right. Lyndon?
Chair, is it a possibility? We did look when we mentioned letters. We saw the ones that were used on rent arrears, but is it possible for us to see some of the letters that are used in other departments?
Yeah, Anthony's listening to you.
Yeah, if that's a possibility, because then we can see what they're saying, because the initial one, some words I know that you have to include in those letters because you have legal responsibilities. But nevertheless, we did look at the wording, I know at some length actually, and tempered it quite a bit. And it would maybe be useful just to look at some of those other letters.
Yeah, are you okay to get hold of some of them, Anthony?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the comment. Yeah, we could certainly attempt to do that in advance of that meeting. My suggestion would be that we set to see how a set of principles could be applied across the various departments in terms of how they collect money owed and how they could be applied, and if there are any barriers to establishing what it is that we want to achieve. And part of that would be in the implementation would be looking at the letters, but I certainly think that having an early view of some of those letters might be helpful. So I'll see if we can collect some.
Nice.
Yeah, it just reinforce that point. It's really the first letter that is the one that is so important to get right. So I think at the moment that's what we could do with is seeing as many of the initial letters from various departments as possible. not necessarily, we don't necessarily need any of the follow-up ones yet, because it's that first one that's that important. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Liz, yeah. Right, so that's sorted. Item 6 is the work plan. So at the moment, on the 23rd of August, we've got the working group. And then September, strange enough, after this meeting, we've got the update of the campaign to increase benefit taker, which sort of goes hand in hand what we're just talking about now. So we'll have that in September. We've also then got Martin Nichols coming to talk about the green fairness, community food growing and garden sharing. So I think that's enough for that month, I think. Following on for that, then we've got Swansea Poverty Tooth Commission in October. So we'll kick that one off. And volunteering policy. So we'll have to we'll have a look at that during the months to see how we can bring that to this group. So that's what we got for the near future. And then coming up to the end of the year, then we've got the affordable credit draft policy, which will be back with us then, Anthony. Yep, he's nodding his head, so I'll say yes. Les?
Yeah, just on the volunteering policy, I'm pretty sure, I'm trying to think which PDC, there is another PDC looking at it, probably the people one. So I'm always just very cautious about making sure we don't duplicate effort. And can we perhaps just double check, are we leading on this or are they leading on it? Just so we don't go on both do a lot of work and then find out we're doing the same stuff. Thanks.
When I spoke to the cabinet member, she said that people were not looking at it. So, but anyway, we double check. So we're happy with the work plan up to October, and the others will just drop in.
Yeah.
Okay, if there's nothing else, thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.